If you have kids that play sports, you're really going to have to see this. Norway's Olympic chief, this guy, is getting interviewed about his country's record-setting haul of medals that they just won at the Beijing Olympics. And here's what he says.
And it's not a main objective for us. The main objective for us is to make the athletes have fun all the way through the games. And this is something that are part of the Norwegian sport model all the way from the start, from the childhood. It should be physical activity based on fun, many types of activities, variety, different sports, lots of small competitions, but we do not track record of.
Okay, hold on. Everyone is jamming their kids into elite programs at younger and younger ages, and this guy says his super successful national policy is keeping it fun. It's not a fluke. Norway has been leading the world in per capita elite sports success ever since they adopted this policy ages ago. It makes sense when you think about it, and we should be thinking about it. Not just to try to achieve more top-level international success, that's fine, but because this is what's actually best for the kids. Okay, I know this channel is mainly for travel stuff, but I just had this fascinating talk with this guy named Peter Mattsson about youth sports, and I felt like I really need to share this with everybody. So Peter he's the director of elite sports for Riksidrottsförbundet in Sweden. That's like the national sports association. And he's responsible for funding all the national programs, all the national teams, all the Olympic athletes, World Cup athletes, all that kind of stuff. And his background, he's a pro golfer. He was the coach of the English golf team. And now he's running this whole elite program. And here's the thing. If you're a parent of a young athlete, here's some news. We're getting most things wrong. I know it's going to come as a bit of a shocker, but we're really getting most things wrong. And I feel like I really need to put this guy on camera and have him explain a bit more. So we're just getting connected now. Peter, are you there?
I'm here, yeah.
Great. How's it going?
Yeah, I'm doing fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. So Peter, I know, you're the parent of young athletes as well. And then you've got your other hat on where you're the head of this whole program, but I want it just to be primarily for parents. So if we're going to put things in that perspective, and these are for parents who maybe have their kids' aspirations that they want to take it to the highest levels of sport, or just enjoy kind of an amateur sport level. I mean, this applies to kind of everybody. So let's get started. Isn't it true that they're dropping out in crazy numbers?
Yeah, that seems to be a worldwide problem, and the development is certainly going in the wrong direction. I think there used to be a saying that kids are involved in sport for about 10 years in our country at least, and that period was from sort of 10 to 20 years old, and it's dropping rapidly now, and we now see our numbers peaking at about the age of 11, which is obviously way too early.
I'm here to announce my retirement from sports. Baseball, basketball, all of them. I feel like it's time. The pressure that it takes to play at my age is just too much. So I'm done with the endless advice from parents to keep my head up, to keep my head down, to keep my head in the game. I know you think you helped. I'm walking away from the coaches that left me on the bench every time the game was on the line. I'm sure they'll agree I'm leaving at the peak of my career. I'll miss my friends and the fun we had when we were young. I said I'd play this game as long as I was having fun. And now, it's time to call it quits.
So they used to play from age 10 to 20. Now they're starting at what, 5, 6 and quitting by 12, 13, 14?
Yep, a lot of that.
Hard to produce some world-class athletes, Olympic athletes, when so many are quitting at age 14, isn't it?
Exactly. The big I have yet to see anybody that's reached their potential at the age of 11.
I'm the most animated coach that you've probably ever seen when my team's playing. I go watch my kids play. I don't say boo. I don't wave my arms. I don't try to coach my kids. With all due respect to most parents out there, I probably know more about basketball than most of them, okay? But I sit in the stands and I don't say a word. I don't try to tell my kid how they should play. You know what I tell my 2 boys when they come ask me, Dad, why are you asking me, man? I didn't run your practice. Go talk to your coach. But don't talk about your coach in front of me, man. Because if you are, then you're not playing basketball. You don't understand why you didn't play better? Go talk to your coach. I'm not your coach. I'm your dad. Somebody disrespects you, then I'm here. If you fail, good. Deal with it. I'm going to help you get up. But don't come talk to me about coaching. I do this for a living, man. I'm not going to criticize a guy that's trying to help you.
Is that one of the findings from sort of the couple of years when we had COVID and parents weren't allowed at training or by the sideline was that kids seemed to enjoy practice and playing sport a lot more.
So the data shows that kids like it better when the parents weren't there. Even if they would say to the parents, sure, I don't mind if you're there, or please come, the majority of them, or overwhelmingly, preferred it when they weren't there.
And I think one of the difficulties with kids and parents is that as a kid or as a child, I think there's a big risk that you'll be saying what you think that your parents would want to hear.
Yeah, interesting. So if you do go, you can make your presence less pronounced. I mean, you could stand further back, don't yell anything. I mean, that's all the other thing is that even shouting positive stuff is bad from what I've heard.
I think as a parent, standing back a little bit, giving the kids a bit more room and letting them enjoy the game that they're playing or the sport that they're playing, that's kind of a good thing to think about.
So, basically we don't want to distract them. I heard you before have this great metaphor, like in the classroom. Well, what can you share that?
Well, I think if you think about sport, maybe similar to a classroom, if there's a math test in a classroom, or if there's a class trying to focus on learning whatever subject it is, then parents normally wouldn't show up and say, hey, great, well done on that test there, or shouting and trying to root for the kids. That's just not something that we do, but we tend to do it in sports, and I'm not sure that's all that clever.
Because we're not going to give them higher math test scores by standing there and like cheering for the players, especially like you cheer the name of the one kid who got the answer right. I mean, it's just going to make everyone nervous and distracted. Yet that's exactly what we're doing on the side of the field when we're doing it for sports. And we don't have that, we don't make that connection. It makes total sense when you think about it in those terms. Canada Hockey did these great videos about like if the tables were turned and what that would look like. Have you seen those?
I'd love to see what that would look like.
Nice putt, Frank.
Come on, Dad, focus. Widen your stance a little. Don't slouch. And don't screw up. This is the big leagues. What are you doing? Keep your eye on the ball. That was pathetic.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, sorry doesn't cut it.
How do we talk to our kids right after the match?
That when the kids come back from the park, having played football or having played whatever sport it might be, what do you ask them? Well, very, very seldom you ask them, did you win? How many goals did you score? You ask them, did you have fun? Did you enjoy it? And I think that's a really, really good lesson to try and keep in mind.
Basically, don't ask how they performed. Don't say, did you make any good assists? Did you make any goals? Did your team win? Really, the only question is, did you have fun? And if you're really curious, maybe you can be like, hey, do you feel like telling me about your match?
Absolutely.
and no, like, sort of post-game analysis in the car on the way back. Hey, I really think you should have hustled back on defense more. I really think you should have done, just like totally don't go there, right?
Correct.
Parents play a very key role in their kids enjoying sports. I can only speak for what my parents did, and my parents life didn't revolve around swimming. Yeah, it took up a ton of our time. Swimmers spend way too much time in the pool, but our life didn't revolve around it. So no matter what, if I had a good meet or a bad meet, we were still going to the pizza parlor at the end for the big party. And that, to me, just was like the grounding that I needed. So, once we left the swimming, we didn't talk about swimming or times or disappointment or achievement or whatever. It was literally, what do you want on your pizza? And here's, 10 quarters to go play some video games. So I think what parents' role is really to be there when the kids need them, to support them and match their support and commitment to their sport. That's what my parents did. And most importantly, provide that other side of life. Make sure that their kids have a well-rounded, balanced life. And, just be happy for them.
There was one great comment I heard, that if the kids are really, trying to get you to give them feedback, like, hey, mom, dad, how do you think I did? And they're really kind of probing you. They like, isn't there this I think there was some line where they say, I'm going to leave that to the coach, but I can just tell you this, I love to watch you play. Right?
Isn't that a great thing to hear?
It's ought to be a great line. I know I didn't use it enough on my own kids, but I'm hoping now this is exactly what's going to be needed. I mean, I remember some of my kids had some yelling coaches. It just makes you cringe.
Yeah, I'm not sure yelling is a good thing.
But if we have a coach that's yelling a lot, should we parents get together and have a talk with them and say that's not okay? I mean, is it important that we put an end to that?
I think so, yes, for sure. Because I think, again, what we're after is kind of the intrinsic motivation within the kids. How do we get the kids to really fall in love with the sport, to want to do it? Well, I don't think the way to do that is have a yelling coach on the sideline.
Isn't it this classic mistake where the parents are kind of go, my kid's amazing, it's dominating in this young ages, but there's this classic misconception, because isn't it some kind of a developmental range? Like some kids, let's say an 11-year-old, some 11-year-olds are at like a 9-year-old level in development stage, and some are 2 years ahead at a 13-year-old. So you've got like a 4-year difference on the same field, and 4-year difference at that age between players is night and day, right? I mean, that doesn't mean they're amazing players. That just means they were developing a little earlier and others were developing slower, correct?
That's right. That's usually referred to in sport as the relative age effect, which means, just as you say, that an 11-year-old can be, in terms of development, at the age of 13, while somebody else is at the age of 9. And if you put those two children in the same team or in the same training group, then obviously they're going to have some very different chances to develop from the training that you do.
Especially when it comes down to the semifinals, finals, and it's a close game, they like to throw in all the best players. And in Swedish, you call that topping, or I guess you're just kind of putting in all your best players and giving them more playing time in general. What do you think about that?
At a young age, you need to be really, really careful as a coach, because again, what you're doing then is probably giving the ones that might, in terms of relative age, be ahead of the game, more chances than what you give the other ones. And I think if you're really focusing on development rather than sort of winning tournaments or winning matches, then you need to think twice about topping.
Isn't there like Michael Jordan, the classic example? At age 15, he didn't get into his varsity high school team. And he went to the local park or whatever, his local basketball, and he just practiced like crazy himself all summer. But for many other people who don't have that kind of dedication, but have perhaps the natural abilities to have matured into an amazing player, they're going to quit. And we're turning people away who are amazing players by doing this kind of topping, because we get so fixated on winning. It seems like even with youth sports, we got to have a winning record, and as long as they're practicing, we want to win. Is winning is that getting in the way of us doing well long term by putting too much pressure to win at a young age?
Very often, yes, definitely. That's that's one of the reasons to why a number of sports in Sweden now have taken away the idea of using league tables for children's sport and for youth sport.
What is it? There's like an expression. There's as many people as possible, staying involved as long as possible in as good of an environment as possible. That's like the magic formula, right?
Absolutely. And I think that third element, as good as an environment as possible, that's a really, really important aspect, because it's not just sort of keeping kids there for the sake of keeping them there. We also need to provide that environment that is really fun, challenging, inspirational, motivational, where you just want to hang out and where you want to spend time.
I have a daughter playing in an elite team here in Sweden. I've noticed some interesting things during the years, seeing them grow up. At the age around 13-14, an academy team took a lot of players to their team. My daughter and a few others stayed in a local team with another environment. That year, the academy team won Gothia Cup, one of the biggest tournaments in Europe. But now, a few years later, no one of those players are playing at a high level. And when it comes to the players at this elite level, they have something in common that I've noticed. None of these successful players have had any ambitious parents. Or I could put it in another way. These players had more ambitions than their parents, and not the other way around, which is very common in other situations.
But what happens is during the time when your kid's doing so well and developing early, they start putting all these kids on higher level teams. And then what happens is it's like those really good teams go around and kind of vacuum up all the amazing kids at that age. And now you have these super teams, and then they're clobbering all the other teams. And then those teams that are losing all the times, they want to quit, and it's no fun for them. And it's like this kind of lopsidedness that happens that changes the way youth sports played. What do we do about that?
Well, it's a difficult one, but I think a lot of the ways and the opportunities to change this lies with parents, and it lies with coaches and clubs. And I think also we need to remember that there are some differences between team sports and individual sports. And I think that the main sort of the bottom line is really about trying to answer the question, how do we provide an environment that can develop this individual, this child, this youth, so that he or she can sort of really find joy in continuing to be part of sports.
These more serious teams having more practices, making the kids, they have to come otherwise. And when the kids get tired, that's not an excuse to miss. And then these kids are burning out. It's like we're into this weird cycle that we somehow need to break. What's the way out of that?
Well, I think one way might be to be a little bit less focused on age and more focused on, say, level of ability, because I think, like you say, one of the challenges for kids that are early developed is that they also need challenges, and they need to be put in an environment where they can sort of see that they need to learn more and they need to develop from where they are in order to move forward. And I think if we let them do that with maybe slightly older kids, then that could be one way. And I think that's kind of a bit of a trap that we've gotten caught in, that we seem to be wanting every 12-year-old to play with 12-year-olds. And I'm not sure that's the best thing.
I'm thinking of Brazil, like in beach football, street football, where they're kind of all the ages are mixed. Where I grew up too, in my little, backyard neighborhood, we kind of mixed ages and just had a game, and no one can. And that seems like when it's the beauty of the game, when you got a big mix of people, and that lifts. You're saying that's kind of a better way to go.
Well, I think that's another reason for free play, for advocating free play, because when kids get together as a group, that seems to be the way they do it, or we do it. I mean, obviously, when you play together in the park, you want two teams that are competing sort of quite evenly with each other. You don't want one team winning 20-0. That's boring.
Is that something the parents need to get involved in, or the coaches, to actually actively make the season a better length so they can do other stuff and take a rest? How do they do that? And what's the right length of a season?
Well, that's a tricky question, because it probably varies with different sports. But I think one rule of thumb is to somehow try to see that in the year there should be room for more than one sport, and I think that can be accomplished by either sort of having two separate seasons, or maybe more than two separate seasons, or by doing multiple sports at one time. I think either way, or both.
Do you mean by like encouraging multi-sport athletes, or maybe just taking the hockey team and saying, okay, this month we're swimming, like this kind of stuff, just to diversify and do it that way?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of data as well that suggests that the athletes that really become world class in any sport, they've done a lot of other sports as well along the way. They may have had sort of one main sport that they've done most of the time, or they've focused mostly on, but they've added, or they've had sort of complementing sports, a number of different sports that they've also done along the way.
Okay. And does that apply to kind of these summer camps and extra private training and all this stuff? I mean, the kids often want it. That's what their passion is, and the parents want their kids to stay ahead. And are we doing it, not doing them a service by putting them in these summer camps and getting them this extra and elite training?
Well, there's certainly a balance that somehow needs to be struck there, because obviously if you're going to become really great at something, you need to do it a lot. You need to practice a lot of football if you're going to become a great footballer. But at the same time, doing just that and doing maybe too much of it, especially in sort of over organized ways, that can certainly be a way to failure rather than success.
What's the age cutoff? Like if they're up to 13, 14, should we kind of force our kids to take more summer breaks and try other stuff and just be kids?
Yeah, I think in Sweden, we try to separate between what we call children's sport and youth sport. And usually we draw the line at the age of 13. And in our sort of basic philosophy document, we say that kids sport or children's sport should be about play, and it should be about playing sport near where you live in sort of simple circumstances and a lot with your friends.
Isn't it part of the thing, especially at this young age, is that I've noticed with my kids' sports as well here, is that if they were trying to do multiple sports, but when they miss one sport for another sport, and then they show up and then they're penalized for that by not getting to start because they were busy missing trainings, even though they were at a different thing. In Norway, isn't it like they don't penalize kids for that kind of stuff? If you just miss practice because you don't feel like going at a young age, or you're doing a different sport, they don't penalize you for that.
Well, I think again, it's about looking at the bigger picture, and sometimes there are good reasons to miss practice. One can be that you're tired, or that you've got schoolwork to do. Another one can be that you're involved in another sport, and that sport happens to have training at the same time.
How do we fix that? I mean, it's so intense. They're training like professional athletes, but they don't have, the doctors, the physical therapists, that whole support network that pro athletes have, the cryogenic machines freezing their bodies at night or whatever, all that stuff. And so isn't the injury rate in youth sports just going off the charts now?
Yeah, we've certainly seen some dramatic figures in that. And I think one of the problems is that if we keep our kids in this environment where they do the same thing, do the same type of training day in and day out, then there's no surprise really that overuse injuries rise.
Okay. And do you think the answer to that is to like maybe bring down the organized play and encourage and increase the free play and just let them, because they're less likely to get injured when they just go down and goof around on their own compared to when it's a more high intensity organized training?
Yes, I think that would certainly be one way. And I think no matter how we do it, we need to find ways to get just much more variety into sports, into how we train, into how we sort of organize our programs.
And I saw some statistic that was something like, I mean, I'm not saying this is 100% accurate, but it's something like for every elite athlete, professional athlete, there's 44 kids that have career-ending injuries. I mean, that's a crazy game. If that's true, I mean, that's a crazy game of Russian roulette you're playing with your body.
It is definitely, and again, it's a way of saying that too much monotony, too much of one sport cannot be a good thing. You need to mix that up with doing other things as well.
Talk to me a second about tournaments. This is like, there's a lot packed into tournaments. Tournaments sound like so much fun. We're going to go play at this big cup and we're going to blah, blah, blah with a bunch of teams and see how good we are. But what's the real scoop on tournaments at young ages?
First of all, I think tournaments very often are one of the reasons to why the season gets longer and longer, because clubs tend to put tournaments at the back end of the season or before the season really starts. So it becomes a challenge then to sort of stay involved in other sports. I think secondly, tournaments when you go away is also where things that you would not want to happen in sport can happen. There are maybe other opportunities for bullying, abuse, and sort of bad things that really should not be involved in sport that can happen.
It's like, I remember being at these meetings with my kids' teams, and it's like they'd show us what they hope to do with the different tournaments for the year, and then they'd put the price tag for the year, and we'd all sort of swallow hard and we'd go, oh my God, that's so expensive. And if you took away most of the tournaments, it would like have reduced the whole fee of the team for the year by something like 75%. I mean, it made it a lot cheaper, especially if we're coming along and going to hotels and who's doing the driving and then the pressure. I mean, it's a huge part of the cost. And then I remember there were a lot of single parents there that couldn't afford it. And then their kids wouldn't go. And then they don't feel like they're with on the team as much. I mean,
exactly. Yeah. I think as a coach of any youth team, you really, really need to think carefully about what you can do nearby without it costing too much money. Because like you say, that yes, of course, there are parents that can afford and where this is not a problem. But on the other side of the spectrum, you've got other parents and families where this becomes a real big problem.
Aren't the Norwegians leading the way in this? What are they doing?
Well, they've for a long time had this belief that tournaments should not happen until after the age of 13 or 14 or something like that, where again, similar to what I said, that we're trying to sort of really get across in the Swedish system, that you stay at home, do kids sport, children's sport nearby where the cost can be kept at a minimum.
So smaller tournaments closer to home, within whatever, 10, 12 kilometers, 20 kilometers or something, none of these sort of overnight trips.
Well, you really want to focus on the sport. You want to use the time to sort of participate in sport and not travel. And you want to use money to develop kids in sport and not get them traveling around the country.
And if they say this is so great for team bonding, what's your answer to that?
It is, and there are many things that you can do that are great for team bonding, and not all of them have to cost a lot of money.
I can go to whatever, like a ropes course nearby. There's all sorts of fun activities for kids, I guess, nearby. How is this working for the Norwegians? All this, what is it? What do they have? It like a keep it fun policy?
Well, if you look at winter sport in particular, it seems to be really working really well. Norway is leading the way in the Olympics and Paralympics over time and over the last few years.
And that comes even to just getting equipment. I know when your kids come to you and they're like, they want the latest, coolest shoes, they want the best, whatever, lacrosse stick, hockey gear, you name it. And sometimes we kind of cave in and we buy this stuff for them. But then I heard when I read the statistic that it actually gets them to quit sooner by buying them better stuff. I mean, that makes no sense. Explain.
But I think in getting those latest shoes and the best skis and the most expensive hockey stick, maybe, I think that tends to put some extra pressure, added pressure that the kids may not need on them.
So it's like they have to like live up to the equipment. So it's like they put on whatever, the Air Jordans, they walk out on it looks great in the store, but then they walk out on the court with those and everyone's going, ooh, they're expecting that kid to be amazing. And the kid kind of suddenly realizes, oh, I better perform to live up to the level of this gear. Is that what we're talking about?
That's right. There's a lot to live up in great gear.
Here in Sweden, and I've seen this in other places, you have the little cafe next to where they're playing their games on the weekend, and you go in there and they're selling Coca-Cola and ice cream and candy bars and all sorts of junk. And then they have also now the stuff that's kind of greenwashing, that like a yogurt drink that looks like it's healthy, but it's got just as much sugar as the other soft drinks. What are we doing?
Yeah, well, I think maybe one of the problems is that kiosks and cafeterias are selling what people are asking for. And the problem here is that we're dealing with kids that probably do not really know what they need after training or before training. And I would really love to see cafeterias providing good stuff, good food, good sort of snacks for the kids, so that they can come to the training really prepared, and they can perhaps finish off the training with getting some good stuff back into their body. That would certainly help their development as well.
So let's feed them more like elite athletes, because elite athletes don't eat that junk. At least most of them don't.
I hope not. No. That what we certainly need is this balance between coaching, high-level coaching, professional coaching, yes, but we need a lot of time that's dedicated to free play, exploring, falling in love with the sport that you're involved with.
So like, for example, in a typical training, let's say you have a 12-year-old, and let's say they're training 3 times a week. Should one of the 2 of those practices, the coach just take a bunch of balls to the players and go, okay, guys, have at it. Here's some shirts, here's some water bottles. Me and the other coaches are going to go have a coffee in the cafe for an hour. We'll see you at the end of this thing. Have fun. Do whatever you want. Something like that. Because it's hard sometimes to get all the kids together when they're driving from further away and get organized to get the field time. So you're saying just kind of throw the stuff in there and go have fun and see in a bit.
Yeah, I think somehow we need to broaden the picture a little bit, and I think even if you're sort of trained 3 times a week in a sport, that's actually not that much. And again, if we go back to the Peter Forsbergs or the Bjorn Borgs or the Armand Duplantis, to take sort of a more recent example, then 3 times a week is not what's going to make a sort of a world beater. 3 times a week is just the start. Then I think one of the challenges as a coach in any sport is to get your athletes, your children, your sort of young aspiring kids that you've got in front of you, to also sort of make use of the rest of the week, so that those 3 times per week become something that you do together. And then there's a lot of play, there's a lot of being involved in the sport outside of that as well. Some of the sports where Sweden sort of has been really successful, and it's kind of difficult to explain why. You mentioned tennis, obviously ice hockey is a big sport in Sweden, and some of the other sports that we've seen some successful athletes from as well. I think maybe the main reason, or at least a really, really contributing factor, is that they've been able to play that sport a lot, and not just in organized sport, but a lot on their free time with their mates, playing around, goofing around, enjoying the game.
Here's the thing. A lot of this feels to me like kids who want dessert or want extra screen time. And it's up to us parents to get informed and then have to stand up to them and say, no, we're taking the phone away or the iPad away and saying we're limiting the time because we need to protect their skeletons that are growing. We need to make sure they don't get burned out and injured, and that they're not putting too much pressure on themselves, and that they'll enjoy sport for longer. I mean, that's our parents and coaching responsibility at the end of the day.
It is. And I think a lot of it is also coaching as a parent in a way where we can just sort of nudge our children into doing the right things. Because I think at the end of the day, kids enjoy sport. And if we can find better ways to get that enjoyment to stay in the game, then that's got to be a good thing.
Because I mean, it's easier than it sounds in some respects. Is it basically, if just to have a red thread through this, it basically, we just need to all relax a little and back off and let the kids go have fun and stop trying to turn them into pro athletes at young ages. And that if we just provide those nice conditions, that's likely to happen on its own.
Sounds like a good plan to me.